another episode of Public Relations Channel TV, or PRC TV if you like. And today we have someone very well known in South Africa, not just only in Gauteng, because of her contribution in the political arena and even outside of it, for that matter. Someone who is very, very vocal, very challenging ideas, of course, and also with quite a very deep experience in public management and also in lobbying for ideas, as I said, also in the creation of those ideas. And that lady is Phaphano Phasho. Good afternoon.
Afternoon to you and the viewers at home.
Thank you for coming, man. You know that you come all the way from Joburg. We've been trying to get this meeting to happen, so at last it has happened. So we thank you for that, to take your time and come here just to share ideas with us. Huh?
No, it's my pleasure, and thank you so much for giving me the platform.
Sure. You are very well known in political circles, but and also you are known as a member of the ANC. But it's my information that you have since resigned from the ANC. Can you tell us about you just around this issue that I've raised now?
Well, I think just like Musiwa Lekota and Thabo Mbeki at some point, I decided to take a back seat and apply my mind, because for a while I've been thinking of resigning from the ANC, but I stayed for quite a while, especially when, in fact, from 2012, when the current president took over, because he took over just after Marikana massacre.
Sure.
And I recall in my branch in particular, because I was still the branch treasurer, we had fought quite hard to ensure that he was not nominated. We went to conference. Unfortunately, conference took a decision that he must come in as the deputy president of the ANC. And at the time, it did not make sense to many of us, because the ANC in its posture says that it's a disciplined force of the left and the working class. So we could not understand why the ANC would be voting for a capitalist. It did not make sense, especially post Marikana, because Marikana was in August, and then in December, President Ramaphosa was elected then as a deputy president of the ANC. And since then it had been a difficult struggle, because at the same time I got elected into different positions where I was meant to rally behind the president, which I did. But with the conferences that came 2017, and then with the last conference, we supported Nkosazana, then after Nkosazana, we had to choose between Cyril or Zweli, and one had to choose the better devil, if I might deem it like that. So the reality is that I think for me, and I was making an introspection today and listening to the former president Thabo Mbeki when he called President Zuma a counter-revolutionary. And I realized that when he said that, he did not mean that President Zuma was a counter-revolutionary from a leftist perspective, if I might put it like that. But he was saying it as izimtiti. The very fact that as part of the elite within the ANC, he was saying that President Zuma had deviated from this elitist history of the ANC. And those are things, I think, for me, and the realities that I had to accept, that I was part of an elitist organization, and I'd always known that, but I stayed. And it also took me back to 2018, when the Thabo Mbeki Foundation wrote a letter to the then, in fact, to President Ramaphosa, when he spoke about land redistribution. And Thabo Mbeki was actually very punitive, to the extent that he quoted former President Zuma, and he said that the ANC is not a black organization. So that is one of the major reasons that I left. The reality that we want to turn the ANC, or we wanted to turn the ANC into something that it's not. It's not pro-poor, it's not pro-black, it's an elitist organization whose objective is to enrich a few. Yeah.
Whilst you are there, right? Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma have been, it can be argued, very, very close comrades. I assume in the exile and also after coming back to the country. But then things went haywire. And there are so many reasons that people are advancing. One of them is that the serious conflict which became public between them was the issue of the arms deals. Would you agree with that view? Is it a correct view to say that actually that's why both of them went their separate ways? The former comrades then became the enemies.
Well, it could be part of the reason, but I don't think it's the major reason. I think both President Mbeki and President Zuma were convenient allies. Because if you look at their history and how, for me, I think when I come to a logical conclusion, I come to realize that ultimately you had Jacob Zuma, who has always been considered as Ikaba, and then you had Thabo Mbeki and his allies who considered themselves to be part of this elite club. I mean, if you look at the history of Thabo Mbeki, the very fact that he went to London, he went to study in London at a very young age, when many freedom fighters were stuck in the camps in Southern Africa and in the continent. I mean, we would know that President Zuma was in Swaziland and in Lesotho, mainly deployed here. And after banning, and at the 1991 conference, that's when the two comrades also mainly worked together. And I think Thabo was very clear in terms of what he was doing. And his major objective was to ensure that he wins KZN, and knowing that at the time President Zuma was the chairperson of KZN. Yes. So I think he was smart enough to use Jacob Zuma, and for Jacob Zuma to also believe that he's a friend and a brother to President Mbeki. But I think after President Mandela started to take a step back, now you then had this leadership of the ANC starting to engage on the next phase, because you had the first leaders, your Walter Sisulu, your Oliver Tambo, and others, who some of them had passed on, some of them were retiring. So you needed a new crop of leadership. And if I might take you back, I mean, if you look at the 90s, and there's this old man, he passed on, Vela Pillay, who was head of what was called the ANC Macroeconomic Research Group. He explains how the research group was formed. And then he explains how in the 90s, when they were in Shell House, you had the likes of Lesetja Kganyago, Tito Mboweni, Trevor Manuel going either to London or to the US to study free market systems. And when you take that into consideration, you then also appreciate that Jacob Zuma was sent to KZN. So he was a provincial leader. And these ones, they were groomed to take over. So I think, for me, if President Zuma had read that might be one thing, but you had a crop of comrades within the ANC who were groomed to take over post Thabo Mbeki. That's why when Thabo Mbeki lost in Polokwane, they left with him. That's why today, many of them, they distance themselves from the arms deal. I mean, even President Mbeki says that there was no arms deal. But we know that billions were spent in buying weaponry instead of putting money into HIV and AIDS medication. So I think at the crux of, the difference between Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki and what was perceived as an alliance is the very fact that Jacob Zuma would have likely not been part of their succession plan.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that you are describing the ANC as an elite organization. And you go further, if I understand you correctly, and you say Jacob Zuma's presence upset the apple cart rally. They did not see him as being part of the leadership, right? Will that, if it's true, will that not go against the perceptions that we, as South Africans and probably even outside of South Africa, see the ANC to be, that it is a mass organization? Is there no contradiction there? Have you picked up anything where the ANC at the leadership level will behave as an elite organization, and then when it comes on the ground it behaves as a mass organization? There must be some kind of a mismatch between the two, and the results must be seen that indeed there is a contradiction between those two levels. Would you like to say anything around that? Have you picked up anything in terms of the contradictions?
The contradictions are in the public domain. They are in your face. Mm-hmm. And let me just make an example. On the 29th of May, it's national elections. The ANC in the main, or the leadership of the ANC in the main, it is campaigning in the townships, in the rural areas, in the informal settlements, where you mainly find the poorest of the poor. After the elections, the ANC would not come back to the very areas. And what would happen is that most of the people, you would see then service delivery fights or protests and so on. The ANC goes back to what it's actually, or what it is. It goes back to the middle class, it goes back to the elite, it goes back to the professionals and the academics. It does not consult one with the poor. There's never any consultation. So I think for me, it's an indictment on its own. But now, even if you take the history of the ANC and you look at the ANC and how the ANC was formed, the ANC was formed by the very people who at the time, before the 1910 union, these are people who used to vote. These were educated Christians who used to vote. But they were a portion of the black majority which could vote. The majority were in squalor and degradation. So when the Boer and the British came together and agreed to form this union was exclusive of this educated class. So that's how the ANC was formed. To the extent that if you look at the Bambata Rebellion of 1906, many who became ANC leaders, such as John Langalibalele Dube, distanced themselves from the Bambata Rebellion, which in the main was saying that, or in fact, where the governor of Natal was enforcing and imposing tax laws which wanted to force Zulu men to go and work in the mines and in the urban areas. So some of the leaders of the ANC who formed the ANC were very clear that they did not support such a rebellion. And you then come to post-1994 South Africa. If you look at, in fact, if you take CODESA, the CODESA negotiations, and then post-1994 South Africa, we are here where the ANC never consulted with the masses. Now, when we speak of the ANC as a mass-based organization, when have they ever had an opportunity to consult, engage, so that they can get a mandate from the masses? And you pick this up when you read some of the letters from Krisani that were written by Krisani, letters that were written by Harry Gwala, especially on some of the concessions that the ANC was making. if you take a willing buyer, willing seller, Harry Gwala was even tough on Droslovo to say that you have not consulted. And when you take this position, when it goes wrong, how are you going to go back to the very masses and explain to them, because you never consulted with them, your property rights? If you look at intellectual property law, all those things that keep Black people in poverty, and all the clauses that eventually found themselves in the Constitution, there was never any consultation between those who negotiated on our behalf. At least the government of de Klerk had a referendum with white people in terms of the new South Africa that should be built. There was never ever any consultation. To this day, as the ANC seeks to be re-elected, they're not telling us why we should vote for them. They're not saying, vote us back into power because this is what we have done. Instead, the ANC is saying 28 million people are on social grants. That's what the ANC is saying. Because now the ANC has become a rural party, but it's only a rural party in relation to votes. But in terms of patronage, it's an elitist organization, because it's a few who benefit from the ANC, because also the ANC, remember, has failed to transform the economy. So it's highly reliant on the state, where 90% in the ANC it's about money and 10% is about politics. So there is nothing tangible that says that the ANC is poor. I mean, you look at the public education that is being given to our people, or that is being subjected to the poorest of the poor. You look at health system in South Africa. You have to have money for you to have dignity, or to have a dignified service. For you to go to hospital when you are sick and to get the service that is humane, you need to have money. For your children to have quality education, you need to have money. And these are dual systems that have been created by the ANC, the very ANC. And the sad part is that our ANC leaders sit on the very boards of these private companies that have privatized everything. We've privatized education, we've privatized health, we've privatized electricity, we're privatizing water. So that it tells you that it's this elitist, this right-wing perspective that has been persuaded by the ANC, where the rich overlook the poor. It has not been sustainable. It's not sustainable.
What you then say, because from what you are saying now, quite a very deep analysis starting from pre-1912, right? Before even the ANC was formed, that there were certain things that shaped its formation in 1912. So that by the time the ANC was born in 1912, some of the leaders who participated in the formation of the ANC were actually opposed to what you said, Bambata Rebellion. And then after 1912, as per your arguments, so the exemption amazemtiti system that was created before 1994, 1912, these people who had access to voting never necessarily opposed that system that was in place, but they were also part of the ANC from what you are saying. And then come post 1994, as we're saying. So the question in that context that I want to put to you now is, has this shaped, one, the performance of the ANC in government? I know you've touched on some of these issues. And number two, has this performance significant enough to change the Black lives in the main before 1994?
Look, a lot has changed, but I call it civil liberties, because post-1994 we were given every other right, but not financial rights or financial liberties, economic liberties, especially for many of us who are in urban areas.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just looking at the statistics, quite appalling, that around 70% of land is still in white hands. Now, if you have that equation, that is, in fact, mainly arable land, if you have that equation, it tells you a lot that the black majority are actually slaves in the land of their forefathers. And the ANC has no intention to change that, which is quite unfortunate, and which for me should be a reality that the ANC should be dealing with. To say that we inherited a system which we did not change, a system which has relegated black people to be consumers and white people to be producers. Now, as the ANC, as you give us another chance to lead, this is what we'll do differently to transform the economy so that black people are able to own the value chain of the economy. So those discussions are not happening. And unfortunately, the voters as well are not holding the ANC to account. So nothing much has really changed. And I think Moeletsi Mbeki, in his book, The Architects of Poverty, speaks about this, that the ANC has actually perpetuated the apartheid system. We still have an apartheid economy in place, but the difference between the post-1994 economy and the pre-1994 economy is that the Nationalist Party was in charge of its state-owned entity. Like the SOEs, they were so well protected by the state that the private sector could not touch them. I mean, if you look at the SOEs that the ANC inherited from Amabono, your ISCO, your SAA, your ESCOM, and so on, those were functional SOEs. And the argument that has been made was that they were a privy of a few. Well, you can still argue that you could expand so that they benefit the majority. But what did we do? We sold them. We continue to sell them. Today, the ANC has sold SAA for 51 rands. And as taxpayers, as voters, no one is holding the ANC to account. I mean, we were having a discussion with some colleagues, and they were saying that, well, the ANC says 30 years is not enough. However, when you get to parliament or when you get to legislature, you become an instant millionaire. Yet you are unable to change the lives of our people. Because for me, I think what we have not managed to do, we have not managed to think beyond ourselves and what we have. We've got millions of our people who are in squalor, who are in degradation. We've got 28 million people who are on social grants and social relief. We've got more than 6 million people who earn less than 3,500 rands in South Africa. And then we're not having this discussion about income and wealth inequalities. The very fact that you've got Sentin next to Alex. And the ANC sees absolutely nothing wrong with that. And as we go to elections, the ANC is speaking about MK. It's diverting us because in the absence of not being able to convince us, they're confusing us. So now we have to focus on this MK, which is a new party. I'm sure it has its own challenges. But now we have to focus on this party because the ANC cannot speak on what it has achieved and how it's going to change a black life. That's why in the main they're speaking about social grants. That's why they're targeting the poor, and not the middle class and not the elite. They're speaking to those whom they perceive to be ignorant. That's why also if you look at their election strategy, they're cooking, they're going into poor people's houses. They're not going to the suburbs. They're going to houses of the poor, pretending as if they're cooking, pretending as if they're washing their clothes, because they've got nothing to offer, tangible policy. They've got nothing to offer. They can't tell us what they did and what they're going to do. And for me, it's an indictment for a political party which is as big as the African National Congress and which wants to be re-elected. At least let them give us an opportunity as citizens to say, this is the reason why we must vote this party back. I think it's only fair that we know why we must vote the ANC back, because this is an organization that we know that during COVID, millions were wasted. And in fact, corruption, advanced corruption during COVID, when the sickly needed medication, ANC cadres, who some of them want to go back to parliament, some of them want to go to parliament, they stole money from the Department of Health. We're not having these discussions. And when we do, they take it personal because they don't believe they must be held accountable.
I hope I'm not going to forget that point. I want to come back to the point about during the COVID times. But then what you have said interests me quite a lot. And taking it further, there was a time when Thabo Mbeki, I think he was delivering his State of the Nation address. And he spoke or characterized South Africa as a two nations in one state. We have just spoken now about Santin and Alex, which rather just literally speaking across the road. And I'm sure there are many other scenarios that you can talk about here in South Africa. But then to zoom in now, I want you to analyze what the ANC in KZN would have done for the people of KZN to address especially this situation, given that they've been in power in the province for the last 8 years. Is there anything that you can pick up and then say, even if you were to dislike the ANC, but look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as a member of the public, they have done, and people will have benefited out of that?
Look, I think if you drive around KZN, you would see the roads, the infrastructure that is there. You would see the buildings that are there, and there are obviously schools, and there's been a lot that has been done, but I always say that it's a facade. Because any development which does not improve the lives of the majority, then it's problematic. However, we must also look at the numbers, because the numbers are quite telling. You spoke of Thabo Mbeki, who said that good governance stopped in 2007, meaning that good governance stopped during his tenure. However, the numbers say something else. The numbers say that from around 2010 to 2014, you had the largest number of multi-millionaires who were created, including in KZN. You also had a litany of graduates from the universities within KZN. However, this number has dwindled. And, if you want to look at, in many instances, if you want to look at development, you can use the growth of the middle class or the middle strata as a yardstick. If you take the Thabo Mbeki era, you take the Zuma era, you take the Ramaphosa era, what you will find is that the number has completely gone down to the extent that we're sitting around 7% to 13% of blacks who are actually identified as the real black middle class. So it also tells you that we are producing graduates who are now unemployed or unemployable. But over and above that, we are producing a middle or graduates who are indebted. So those are realities that you are mainly dealing with. But coming back to KZN, when we speak of 30 years, I believe there was a time when the IFP, the IFP was also in charge. I'm not sure if it was a coalition.
No, it was IFP.
Yeah, it was IFP. But I recall there was a time that the IFP in KZN took the ANC national government called for the government to actually provide life-saving nevirapine for pregnant women who had HIV. And then after that, you obviously then had the ANC, which I think was for me a milestone, and it takes me back to why Jacob Zuma was actually deployed to KZN, because the province also started to integrate not only as what was perceived to be a tribal province, but to integrate also into national politics post the IFP era. But what we are seeing now, and which is quite interesting, and I think in terms of the projections and what the polls are saying, they are saying that due to mismanagement, due to the collapse of eThekwini, I mean, there was a point where everyone was saying about Durban. Was it Durban? Durban was the place to be. But today, eThekwini has deteriorated. It's no longer a picture of what it was. So the picture today, it's telling that mainly the ANC is going to lose KZN. And it might be because the new, younger leadership might not be in tune with what people want. It might also be that people are just tired. Ordinary people are just tired of being given breadcrumbs. And an example of this is if you look at what is called the construction mafias. Because at the heart of the construction mafia was KZN.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they were...
In fact, this is where it started.
That's where it started. But then it tells you that black people who could not integrate into the system of your CIDP, which mainly favors big white companies, were automatically excluded. So companies which went into a construction company which will go or will come into eThekwini or any other region, it would have to be forced to give local communities a piece of the pie. So these communities had to impose themselves. And construction companies do not understand this. They do not understand why ordinary people will want to impose themselves. But it happens because the economy is still not in the hands of the people. So now you call it a mafia because ordinary people are starting to ask questions and are starting to say, allow us to come in. It's no different to what is considered illegal mining that is taking place in Limpopo, where the ANC government is refusing to give ordinary people, including people from the very villages, licenses to mine. So these are unfortunately the systematic challenges that the ANC, whether in KZN or in Gauteng, has not been able to do. That's why today Panyaza is running with Nasispane, creating this voodoo economy that is non-existent, that government is going to create jobs, non-existent jobs that are going to end. In fact, it's not even permanent jobs. It's voodoo jobs that will end just after elections because the state itself has not been able to create a conducive environment to create enough entrepreneurs who can grow their economy. So that is the major challenge. So you've got, certain establishments like construction mafias, zamas, where ordinary people are trying to make a living. But because it's not within the confines of the establishment, it is any other thing but legal. So those are some of the challenges, yes, that the ANC in KZN is faced with. People who want umnotho, real economic freedom.
Some have argued, and they say, even that resistance by people who are in business who form the forums, when they were pushing during the process or after the process, they also produce unintended consequences. And these consequences relate mainly to some kind of partnerships that were formed between the elite of the business forums and some of the politicians. In other words, there was an added pacting between these two sides. And that also produced its own results in the sense that only a few from the forums benefited because the politicians who are within administration or who control administration, they were then able to pass some of the tenders or jobs, works, if you like, to these people. Does that hold water from your observation or from your experience of this? That yes, indeed, the business forums did push, and government to a large extent did concede some space. But within that process, there were also some unintended consequences, and are suffering from this today.
Look, the system is inherently corrupt, and in its corruption, it will obviously create or produce instability. It will produce patronage. It will produce nepotism, because it's not structured to favor the majority. It's people who are scrambling. It's a scramble. So when you scramble, you must manage the process. And it also it goes back to the inability of the ANC to transform the economy. So that is the major issue, including the ANC itself. In the ANC, they are fighting for tenders, for these opportunities, because they've not transformed the economy, which is in the hands of white people. So all of us are in the space where we are fighting for the small pie. We're not fighting for the big pie. We're not fighting to ensure that the ANC break up these monopolies. We're not fighting to ensure that the banks, the financial service sector is in the hands of the people. We're not fighting to ensure the retail sector. I mean, Pakistanis, Somalis, the guys who have come, the migrants who've come to the country, they've managed to see how white people are controlling the value chain. And they've set up their own systems. We've not been able to do that. That is the major problem. So we cannot expect stability from instability. So I was also hoping that one of the forums, some of the forums in KZN, because one of the good things about KZN, good or bad, is the ability to confront the system. But it's not I believe the people are not confronting the system in a conducive manner or in a sustainable manner. Should be able to say with the numbers of the people that are in KZN, the Zulu people who are in KZN, just the language is a currency. Just the language. The currency that can enable you to start a bank, currency that can enable the people of KZN to start retail companies, to start investment companies. And those companies can trickle down to change the lives of the people in the rural areas. You have got numbers, but you don't know how to use those numbers. And what white people have perfected, they are a minority, but they think like a majority. You are a majority, but you think like a minority. That is the big challenge that I think we are faced with, and the inability to ensure that money circulates amongst ourselves. White people are unapologetic. I mean, they're going to vote DA, they're going to vote Freedom Front. No one calls it racism. What stops us from coming together and saying, look, when we look at the economy of KZN, it's in the hands of whites, it's in the hands of Indians. We are here. How do we start being part of this economic value chain? Besides the taxes, you have got the numbers. You're not able to use the numbers to your own advantage. And what you've done, you have allowed political parties to, in fact, deepen your crisis. Because political parties will come and go. It's elections that are going to come. They're going back to legislature in KZN where they're going to fight. And your struggles as the people of KZN continues. But you've got the numbers. Why are you not organizing yourself? For me, that has been the big challenge, that we're a majority that thinks like a minority. And until we get out of that trap, we cannot complain, because these political parties, all of them, they serve the interest of capital. All of them, the majority of them, are funded by the Oppenheimers, they're funded by the Menels. So they're going to continue to serve the interests of big capital. But we're a majority. Capital is a minority. I mean, it's perhaps less than 100 families which control the economy of this country, if not less. Could be less than this.
Could be less.
Yes.
You spoke earlier on about Jacob Zuma basically being a person who rattles the cage of the elites, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then fast forward, we're now in 2024. And towards the end of last year, he formed a new political party, right? That's one. And then two, you talk about KZN not looking into numbers as their weapon or strength. But and also, it has been said, now I'm zooming in now into my question, which is one, the Zulu kingdom, led by the royal family, is seen as one of the strongest establishments that we have in this province. And then over and above that, there is Shembeshach. But then I want to speak more specifically about the Zulu kingdom. There have been some arguments where some people will say that KZN be independent because it has the numbers, it has the recognition, it has the strength. But then others are looking at that as counter-revolutionary. Now, in relation to Jacob Zuma, especially after forming the MK, there's a lot of arguments going around. And people are even saying it in public where they say, let the Zulu boy be located in KZN. Which is like making a call to the other 8 provinces to say, look, you don't have anything to do with MK because it's a Zulu party. Huh? Now, don't you see this as a way, following from your point, that this is a strength which is not being utilized? One, that it is justifiable to a certain extent to use this province, given the numbers, and the institutions like the kingdom and Shembe, to drive certain points. Those points could relate, for instance, to more or less, it can be seen also as counterproductive, and I would agree in relation to the Western Cape, where the Western Cape is seen now, or there is an advocacy for Western Cape to be independent from South Africa. So what would you then say, more especially in relation to the formation of the MK, as a party that is located here, and where now we begin to see tribalism arguments being used either to encourage or discourage, even though I've seen more arguments discouraging the formation of the MK in the context of tribalism. What would be your view there?
Well, I said if you cannot convince them, you confuse them. Mm-hmm. If you look at Jacob Zuma as a statesman, and when he was still a president, I mean, I'm not sure if you recall that the minister within the presidency was Collins Chabani.
Yes.
And he had different ministers, young and old, from different parts of the country, your Limpopo, your Northwest. So obviously because MK is an antithesis to the status quo, in order for you to disregard it or to cast aspersions on it in the face of the masses, you have to characterize it somehow. And the best way is to call it a Zulu party. But if you recall, the people who came up with this narrative of Zulu and Zulu boy, it was Saki Makhozoma, Thabo Mbeki, in those transcripts, where they were calling Jacob Zuma a Zulu boy. They even went to the extent of being very, they degenerated. So I do not think that the people of KZN in particular should be in any way concerned about what the leaders of the ANC say. Because if they want to, they can use the tribalist ticket. But if you look at this country, for example, you've got your Black Business Council. These are mainly, they call themselves business people. Some are elite who have organized themselves so that they can pursue their interests or their own interests as business people or as Black business. You've got different organizations in this country which are organized to pursue their own interests. There's absolutely nothing wrong that stops Zulu people from organizing themselves and self-determining in their own interest. Because when the very government is not for you, you then should take matters in your own hands. And primarily because this country, and I've said it again, the land was not stolen from any political party, to the extent that the very ANC was formed by people who worked with the colonial elite. When King Dinizulu was arrested after the Bambata rebellion, he was arrested and taken somewhere to Mpumalanga, where he eventually died, in exile, under house arrest. And after his death, that was the end of resistance by many of the monarchies. And that's when you had political parties working on behalf of the colonizer who came in, and what did they do? They ensured that when they took over and when 1994 came, we could not resist. We could not resist the concessions that were made by the ANC. In fact, we gave white people South Africa in the platter. We did not resist. We did not ask for reparations. King Hintsa was killed. His head was chopped off. We have not asked where King Hintsa's head is. King Janchis, Khosi Janchis, in the Northern Cape, his head was chopped off. We have not asked where is the head of Khosi Janchis. You had kings who were killed. Chief Bambata, some say that he ran away. But no one knows what happened to Chief Bambata, who took on the very colonizer. We had King Tetwayo, who was in exile at St. Helena. We had kings, we had chiefs. We had our forefathers who were killed, who were raped, who were tortured. We have not asked white people to be accountable. So I do not think the people of KZN should then start second-guessing themselves when it comes to their self-determination, especially when the majority of the people are in poverty and squalor, to the extent that the monarch, the Zulu monarch, many of us, we have turned it into a joke because it relies on the state when it has numbers which it can mobilize. As a productive and buying strata. It's not doing that. It relies on the state. That's why Uduma, and that's why government can write a letter to fire the praiser. Is it the
praise singer?
Yes, the praise singer of the prime minister, because they know that they've got the monarch where they want the monarch to be, but they also need the monarchy. So again, it's the monarchy also thinking from a minority perspective, not understanding the power that it has. So I do not think that the conversation where some people start to say that, no, Zulus are tribalist and so on. No. These are people who fought centuries of resistance with Afrikaners and the British. It was not the ANC, it was not Amazimtiti. It was King Tetwa, it was King Dinizulu, it was Chief Bambata, and many other monarchies, their people, not any political party. So that conversation for me, it does not hold because the majority of our people are in poverty. So we need some other intervention. We can no longer rely on political parties. And on this issue, if I might close, Jacob Zuma, in many instances, he reminds me of Chief Bambata. Because when all the educated elite of the time were prepared to concede to the tax laws, he refused. He said, not in my name. So I see Jacob Zuma as that radical, as someone who refuses to conform to the status quo. And in his refusal, he will be castigated, he will be arrested. And I think for me, he's taking a stand at his age, which for me is unfortunate, because we are a generation who should be doing what Jacob Zuma is doing. We should be a generation which is standing up to fight for our rights, to fight for our economic freedom. We should be a generation which considers and recognizes that we have our ancestors who died. We must recognize that white people came to KZN, pushed the monarch to the rural areas where it was dry, and took arable land, and took the sea, and took the water. So I think for me, Jacob Zuma represents an idea which is still untapped, and an idea which speaks to our generation to stand up, because we shouldn't be allowing a man that old to be fighting for us. I think it's quite unfair, because in the process of fighting for us, he has been called names, and they say that he's the most corrupt, when we know that they are the most corrupt. They've captured the state. They've sold SAA for 51 rands. They have collapsed ESCOM. They've created an economy and a market for solar panels, which are owned by the funders of President Ramaphosa. So I think for me, I mean, and I look at myself as well, and the bits that we've done, and I think we have failed someone like Jacob Zuma, because he's the only person who can actually stand up. At least you also have Julius Malema, but you have a Jacob Zuma who refuses to be part of the establishment. Yeah.
Sure. Given all of what you have said, do you think the government, or to be specific, the ANC, deserves to be in power, either here in KZN or nationally?
Well, the ANC itself is failing to convince us why we should vote for it. Look, I have lost all sorts of hope in politics, to be honest. And I think it's mainly because of the ANC. The ANC does not deserve to be in power. And I think at the heart of it is also the spiritual deficit, the fact that they can steal, and after they steal, they can unite and behave as if that those who speak out are the ones who are crazy. The fact that they've turned black youth into human waste. You should go around the township, you should go to the rural areas. Just look at young people, they're doing drugs. Young people are, young girls are pregnant, boys are on drugs, they're on nyaupe. There's no intention to stop the drug smuggling.
What they are called amapara. Do you know that concept? Huh?
No, I've heard about those things. So you need people who will see our youth as human potential and as human capital. You need a leadership that will start to work towards ensuring that young people are turned into a resource, that young people do not go to waste, because this is our future. But no one cares. No one in the ANC is talking about those young people who are loitering around. Instead, they came with this 350. I sat with this professor from Zambia who said to me, Phapano, if for just 1 month, the ANC does not pay this 350, just 1 month, does not pay, withholds this 350, says these are billions. And with these billions, the ANC can build industries. And the ANC has no intention to build young people who are self-efficient, who are self-sufficient. Because as soon as you start to build a young person who can think, they will not vote for you. If they start to empower our people They will start to think and they will start to question the very system that subjects them to this type of life. You want an Eastern Cape type of voter. The majority of people from the Eastern Cape have ran away from the province. They are in Gauteng, they are in KZN, they are in Western Cape. And the current leadership of the ANC will rely on the poor voters in the main to sustain power, despite the fact that Eastern Cape is one of the most corrupt and it's one of the most dysfunctional governments. So the people who are there, who are running away from the Eastern Cape, who are living this dysfunctionality, they're not calling for the ANC to account. So these are the challenges that we are mainly having, that we are running away from the ANC, all of us and many of us, instead of holding the ANC to account. So that is the major problem.
But how, man, how do you hold them to account? Because in democracies like ours, who are told that some of the institutions that have to play the role to enforce government or whoever that is in power to account is through a free media. To a large extent, media in South Africa is very free, but then also they are not using the power that have, the space they have, to report and follow up on certain issues as proper watchdogs of the society. I'm saying this in the context, and I'm putting that to you, of, for instance, Phala, because there are certain instances where they become very vocal and very consistent to talk about corruption alleged to have been done by others. In this case, for instance, Zuma, all sorts of issues that they are taking him to prison for. But when it comes to the issue of Phala, for instance, the media, in my view, is relatively quiet.
Who owns the media?
That's exactly my point to you. Because it seems to me, since both your political organization, I'm not sure if I'm correct if I say they are not strong enough to challenge, including also your civic associations and so forth, the Sankos, for instance, they have a different agenda, or maybe they pursue a certain other interest or priorities. So what then should be done in this case? I mean, because it seems to me that yes, the law does work when it comes to others, but not in relation to some.
No, it comes back to the issue of how white people have managed to perfect the system. Be it the media, be it the financial service sector, be it education, in the absence of owning these institutions which hold the power to define, would still be in the back foot. They would narrate stories how they want to. So it's going to be difficult to impose on them how they should report. It's going to be difficult to impose on ENCA multi-choice, which is a colonial apartheid institution, on Daily Maverick, and all these media houses to report any differently if it does not favor the status quo. It's going to be difficult to have Corruption Watch coming out strongly against corruption in the ANC when Corruption Watch is funded by Oppenheimers. It's going to be difficult to have your Kada Asmal Foundation, to have your Freedom Under Law, to have your CASIC, and all these institutions that are funded by Zionists coming out strongly against ANC corruption when they benefit from the president of the ANC. That's why those who can organize themselves must organize themselves. That's the importance of power, because politics is about power and capitalism is about power in the main. And we have not been able to interrogate, confront, and deal with the system that we are part of. That's why we'll ask, why is the NPA not, strongly looking at Phala, for example, or the money that was stolen under Cyril Ramaphosa's administration? We're not asking, or we could also ask, the NPA under Batohi, which is taking money from Steinhoff and other corrupt white corporates, why it's not going after certain ANC leaders, it's mainly because whites have captured all these institutions. We control nothing. We have not managed to transform anything. That's why those who can organize themselves must organize themselves. That's the most important thing. I mean, what stops the monarch from KZN from starting its own media house? There's nothing that absolutely stops the monarch so that it can start propagating its own stories. But in the absence of doing that, I mean, if King Misizulu is comfortable being a recipient of state money where politicians can disrespect him and disrespect members of the monarchy, then what can we do? But I think at the same time, at some point, we must start to also organize ourselves as ordinary people, because we cannot wait for government to save us. We cannot wait for the monarch to save us. We cannot wait for the church to save us. We must start to organize ourselves, especially when we understand that Oppenheimer's, that Michael Leroux, who owns Capitec, that Rupert, who literally owns everything, funds everyone else. For those of us who have not taken monies from these people, it's time that we start to organize ourselves and mobilize ourselves and to stop mourning, because these people will not be any different. If you look at the media, I mean, Helen Zille was part of Ren Mail. Many white people, the English, the liberals in particular, were part of media houses during apartheid, where they attacked the nationalist government, mainly because they were funded by British mining landlords. And you also had Afrikaner newspapers, owned newspapers and state newspapers. So these are battle of ideas which we have not really tapped into and really started to speak about. Because the reality here is that President Zuma is 82 years old. He won't live forever. And he's one of a few people, as I've said, who's prepared to confront the establishment and to start asking difficult questions in relation to the land, in relation to the economy, in relation to black people owning the value chain. What happens when he passes on? It will mean that we will be left to take on the baton. I do not know if we have the capacity, because if you go against the establishment, it comes hard on you. I've always said that I believe that if it was during apartheid or the colonial era, they would have hanged Jacob Zuma. But we are here. What are we doing to change the lives of our people? Because for me, and what has bothered me, is that we can't sit in ivory towers where we are comfortable and millions of our people are starving. Young children are going to bed without food. That young people are being wasted. Young black males are dying. They are killing themselves. We're not having these conversations. We go on as if these things do not happen. And they happen here in KZN. And I think we should start doing things differently. But you know what I would want? I would want us, when we have a conversation next time, we speak as a think tank and we say, what are the solutions? We can't continue analyzing society. I think we need to start saying, look, this is where we are. How do we change the status quo? For me, I think
that is what you are missing, actually.
Yeah. That's what I would like to see, to say, agriculture, where are we? Financial service sector, where are we? And other sectors. How do we, as professionals, how do we start mentoring? And I think it should just, how do we start mentoring these young people who are in school? And I think it should even be an obligation for us to know that, look, in the process of attempting to make money, you should bring someone along. So I think for me, that's what I want to start seeing, because we've been talking and we are not doing much. And we cannot rely also on black business, because black business, it's selfish, it's inward, it can take money from anyone. it's not speaking on behalf of the majority. It can take money from anyone as long as it's able to make profit. So we cannot rely on so-called black business, which is not questioning the status quo, which is not questioning the corruption in government, as long as they're getting contracts. So we, the people, must start to mobilize ourselves. And you've got a beautiful platform. And I've said it to some of the guys that I've been speaking to say, look, let's start doing something. Let's be the change that we want to see, because we cannot rely on someone like President Zuma anymore. He should be resting, you know. He should not even be studying MK party. In fact, for many of us, we should have stayed in the ANC and contested the battle of ideas within the ANC, but we ran away. And now we are in the periphery. When we have an opportunity to actually organize ourselves so that we can recapture our country from those who have stolen it, from Amazimtiti, the elite, from the likes of Thabo Mbeki, who has come out and said that black people do not deserve to own commercial land, from the likes of Kgalema Motlanthe, who works with Brandhurst Foundation, the very foundation that is owned by the Oppenheimers, that owned Anglo-American, that killed Patrice Lumumba, and that killed many black people for the minerals that is in our continent. So we have an opportunity to regroup. We can't be a generation that continues talking and does nothing.
Moving towards the end of our discussion, I want you to address especially young people. From what you have said, there is a lot that is applicable and relevant to them, actually. That moving now towards this 29 May 2024, if the polls are correct, they are pointing out to a situation where we are not likely to have a majority-dominated government. Instead, we are more likely to have coalitions. What would you then say is the role of young people, especially in that context? If we wanted to achieve a South Africa we all have been waiting and fought for, what is it that they will do so that they are able to get access to employment, to education, and all other basic needs that we actually fought for and formed all of these organizations for? What is their responsibility? What is the size of the challenge in front of them?
No revolution has ever been led by old people. Successful revolutions have always been led by young people. So young people have an opportunity to take their future into their own hands. The ANC has stolen their future. You cannot be young and vote for the ANC. You've got alternatives. You've got the EFF, you've got MK, you've got PAC. So young people can change their destiny, and they've got an opportunity to do that through their vote. The ANC has failed them. Look at the numbers. You're unemployed, you're unemployable, you're in poverty, you are doing drugs, you're wasting away. So for me, I cannot necessarily impose, but if young people, again, want to be the change that they actually want to see and to take their destiny into their own hands, they have to vote out the ANC, which is working with white oligarchs to suppress them and to keep them in perpetual poverty, generational poverty, in fact, and debt. So these elections would be quite interesting because it's going to be a make or break. It's 30 years of the ANC. This new generation of young people, and this is a generation, by the way, which survived the Thabo Mbeki era. This is a generation which was born around the 90s, which was born around 2000. This is a generation, this is a generation which survived. And I'm saying this, and I've said it. This is a generation that has the power to define its own destiny. And the only way to do that is to take out the ANC out of power. Because the ANC, and consistently, They enrich their families, they enrich themselves, and they continue to keep wealth in the hands of the white minority. That is not sustainable. You cannot have an economy which creates the wealthy and which sustains poverty. It cannot be, and the expectation is that black people, the youth, must accept that as a norm and a condition. Poverty is not a condition, it's man-made. So if young people want to move out of this cycle of poverty, the best thing that they need to do is to vote out the ANC out of power. This is their 1994. So for me, that could be the message. Because, I mean, many of us who presume to be an educated class, who presume to be professionals, we cannot make money for ourselves. We are not a productive class. We are heavily reliant on employment. We are not self-sustainable. And it's an indictment. So you need a new political party to come in with a new consciousness, a new thinking that is going to change how black people think, because we are still stuck in a consumer mindset. We are mainly consumers. And the ANC has relied on that. The ANC has relied on giving our people tenders. And a tender is not entrepreneurship, you know? So you need a new type of, you need a Floyd Shivambu type of financial, minister of finance, who's going to come in and say, this is how we are going to change the financial service sector. You need a president like Jacob Zuma who's going to be very tough and say that we need black people to be included in the mainstream economy. You need someone like Julius Malema, who is very, very passionate on issues of education. You need to deal with the issue of the land. But what you need in the main, you need black hegemony, you need black harmony, you need black people to unite. And the youth have an opportunity to play that role in uniting us, especially the older generation who have failed to confront the system and to change their future.
There you had it, black hegemony. Your young people today, this 2024 is your new 1994. That is the argument. That things will not change until you stand and fight for your rights and organize yourselves. You cannot have a better education system. Until next time, we thank our guest quite a lot, Phapano Phasho. The ideas that she has, the arguments, very passionate about them. And I'm hopeful that she's one of the people that are going to be featured somehow in some of our structures, either at a provincial level, local level, or national level, to change things as we've seen them. Because, as she said, since 1994, we've not had really any meaningful change. Please like and subscribe. Until next time.